For over a decade now, we've seen Hollywood and streaming services trying and failing to find, quote, the next Game of Thrones. From Wheel of Time to Witcher, fantasy fans have continuously gotten their hopes up thinking maybe this time they'll finally get it right, only for the projects to crash and burn before they even get to the conclusion of the source material. Meanwhile, anime continues to have hit after hit. Because of the fact anime is, animated, people almost forget that a lot of animes are also adaptations. So why does anime continuously succeed where Hollywood and streaming services fail? Before jumping into that question, I want to address one thing. Some might feel that because manga is typically the source material and manga is a visual medium, that takes out part of the work required in making a good anime. While I can see somewhat this point, it's not necessarily accurate. Not all anime is actually adapting a manga series. Apothecary Diaries, for example, is wildly successful, with both a film and a third season in the works, and it's actually an adaptation of a light novel series. Yes, manga has been made of Apothecary Diaries, and many of the first 2 seasons' visuals are similar to those, but the third season is underway and will be adapting material only from the light novels, as the manga is not yet at that point. Another instance of this occurring is Howl's Moving Castle, which was famously adapted by Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki from the novel by Diana Wynne Jones, and which adaptation will likely still be loved and respected in years to come. The Wheel of Time show, or Howl's Moving Castle? All that said, let's jump in. First, it's important to point out a key distinction between anime adaptations versus a lot of book adaptations. Anime is quite obviously animated, while those involved in adapting books to the big screen consistently fail to consider what medium and format would best serve the story. Broadening our pool of book adaptations to extend outside of just fantasy, let's look at the upcoming adaptation for Emily Henry's People We Meet on Vacation. It's a contemporary romance story set in our world with human beings, no magic, and themes and scenarios specific to the average American's life. In this scenario, it makes sense to have a live-action adaptation. The budget can go towards the things you'd expect: wardrobe, lighting, cameras, writing, etc. Sure, you could probably do a cute slice of life anime for this book, but animation isn't necessarily staggeringly better in terms of what would best serve the story here. Now let's look at Witcher. The Wild Hunt video game by CD Projekt Red is considered by most fans, including myself, to be the superior adaptation of the story. Interestingly, the video game isn't even adapting the source material directly. It's a what-if scenario for what would occur after the events of the books. It's taking a lot of liberties. Typically, that's a recipe for disappointing the fan base. Why then did the video game work and the Netflix adaptation did not? Let's pretend for a second that we didn't change the lead of the show several seasons in, because many of the show's problems occurred before that anyway. First off, it didn't look good. There were a couple of fight scenes and a few of the creatures that looked decent, while others looked absolutely terrible. In fantasy stories, it's vital to ask how much in the world is outside of our own, as magic and mythological beings rarely look good in live action. Sometimes you can make it work in a film because the budget is entirely dedicated to something that only lasts roughly 2 or so hours, but when you have to spread a budget across multiple episodes, it starts to show. I do think a show was the best option for a Witcher adaptation if we're talking between a movie or a show, but live action was not. Just look at the cinematic trailers created by CD Projekt Red, and imagine if we'd gotten an entire show that looked like that. Visually, it already captures the world, the creatures, the magic, the clothing, the armor, everything basically, better than the Netflix show did. But of course, visuals aren't everything. Sometimes if a story is amazing, fans can forgive things that don't look perfect, as can casual viewers coming to the story for the first time, which leads us into our second chapter, trusting the source material and the audience. Pausing on the Witcher example and returning to anime. We mentioned Apothecary Diaries earlier, let's analyze it for a moment. In this story, the creators of the anime have trusted the source material. They've recognized that they can use their skills as animators along with talented musicians and voice actors to bring the story to life in the medium they're familiar with. They also trust the viewers of the story. In today's landscape of entertainment, so much is about quick, fast-paced popcorn stories. Reels, shorts, books you can read in a day, and while there's a place for this, that's not what every story is or is meant to be. People adapting works of fiction need to recognize that if a story takes time to build, then they need to honor that. In the case of Apothecary Diaries, it's not until nearly the end of light novel 4 that certain plot points from earlier start to reveal themselves. It was a risk then, given each season of the anime adapts roughly 2 light novels, for the creators to trust the audience. People could have easily watched only a small portion of the story, decided it was simply a mystery of the week setup, and dropped out. If they had, that's fine. The themes tackled in this story and the time that the story takes to really showcase those themes with complexity and subtlety probably aren't going to appeal to the person who makes quick, snap judgments after only consuming a small amount of the story. And that's okay. Not every story is for every person. In this instance, in order to really understand not just the setting, but the characters and their motivations, Apothecary Diaries slowly reveals things. It makes the payoff that much more rewarding and the investments for the consumer that much stronger. And yes, it does mean that we as viewers have to be patient. But if that's the story they've decided to adapt, then they should recognize that slow building is a core part of what makes Apothecary Diaries what it is. If you don't like that about it, why would you even adapt it in the first place? Luckily, the creators of Apothecary Diaries have trusted their audience, and thank goodness they have, because cutting material and throwing in bigger plot points earlier would have completely removed the emotional and tangible stakes. Returning to Witcher then, why did the Wild Hunt work if it wasn't even adapting the source material, whereas the show failed when it was? The answer, by my estimation anyway, is that one trusted the audience and the source material, and the other did not. The Wild Hunt captured the essence of Witcher. The quest lines were similar to the short stories of the beginning of the source material. They were impactful, morally challenging, and grim. The world itself was bleak and ravaged by war. The brutality of both humans and monsters was evident in every encounter, making you constantly question who could be trusted. The show felt as though they were adapting Witcher not because they appreciated these aspects, but because they saw it as an endless money machine. They thought they could build an empire off of it, hence why we saw multiple offshoots being produced, some of which were animated, ironically, but were also poorly written and paced. And offshoots could have been successful if there was continuity in tone or quality or writing or world building, but they were never going to be able to achieve that continuity of tone because they didn't grasp what made Witcher special in the first place. And understanding that cues us up for chapter 3. You actually can make changes. Some people believe that in order for an adaptation to be good, it has to be identical to the source material. I understand where people are coming from with this, but I do also recognize that sometimes when adapting something for a different medium, certain changes can enhance the experience of the story in that form. Let's look at Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood as an example. In chapter 3 of the manga, Edward and Alphonse go to a mining town. The events of this chapter are important later, but the anime handled the removal of this chapter with humor and self-awareness. To ensure the anime focused on getting to know the characters in earlier episodes, they brought up the events of this chapter later, with a character going on a long monologue about how his life was completely changed because of what happened, to which Ed replies that he basically doesn't really remember, shrugs it off, and then everyone just keeps carrying on. This, of course, isn't exactly how things played out in the source material, but it did change things by utilizing something the manga's creator uses all the time: humor. The change worked because it still fell in line with how the characters would behave and think in the source material. Returning to Witcher again. Certain changes could have worked here and there, but some were so startlingly different so as to be nonsensical. Geralt, for example. In the books, Geralt is thought to be a dumb brute by many of the sorcerers who delight in talking circles around him. It's not until Geralt matches their verbal spars that they realize they not only aren't as intelligent as him, but they have to confront that they also aren't as knowledgeable. It also shows how Geralt himself is exceptionally intelligent. He just doesn't take pleasure in belittling others, having been belittled by society so much himself. It also sheds light on why Yennefer is drawn to him. She has never fit in perfectly with the other sorceresses and sorcerers, and in some ways, she finds understanding in that part of Geralt. Both are highly capable and exceptionally smart, though both also know how to wield those aspects of themselves when it matters. In the show, Geralt grunts his way across the continent. Yennefer is erratic and enraged rather than calculating. It deviates so much from what people love the Witcher characters for in the first place. We've spent a lot of time on Witcher though, so as we get into our next chapter, let's now look at an adaptation people actually liked but got canceled anyway. Shadow and Bone. Shadow and Bone was one of the few stories where fans of the books actually debated if they liked the adaptation more than the source material. This, from fantasy fans, is practically unheard of. And Shadow and Bone did nearly everything we've discussed already. It understood the characters and cast actors accordingly. In a time when it feels like no one is ever happy with casts, for once people were almost exclusively praising how perfect the actors were. It also did change things here and there in order to combine the story of Shadow and Bone with Six of Crows, as within the source material, these two series actually take place at slightly different times. While this drew some criticism, it was fairly mild, as the stories were still adapted quite faithfully in the ways that mattered to fans, like the backstories and trauma of the characters, their personalities, their motives, the world, the magic, etc. So if fans were pleased, and the show was decently watched, What happened? Long story short, Netflix didn't believe in it. None of us are naive. We know that if a show isn't making money, streaming services will cancel it. That's just how it goes. You can't continuously sink money into something if you're not making a return on that investment. However, when adapting something you know will take time, you have to also acknowledge, redundant and obvious as it sounds, that it will take time. You don't rush to put something out and then go, oh well, when after 2 years you don't immediately see success. Plan for the future, just a little bit. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't jump into something without recognizing the effort, both in time and in money, that it'll take to really do it justice. But often, they don't actually care about doing justice to a great story. They only see the art people have poured their heart into as a means of making money, and when they don't see that money almost instantaneously, they give up. Things like this happen in anime too. I don't want to act as though everyone involved in this medium is perfect. The Promised Neverland, while not canceled, was rushed, leaving many fans disappointed. And the problem of starting animes and not finishing them has been and is still a problem. That said, I think the problem is worsening with fantasy book adaptations and possibly getting better in anime. An indication of this is with the Witch Hat Atelier anime, which has been rumored for years. A trailer dropped in 2024 with the projected release date for the anime being 2025. Only for it to then get pushed back to 2026. A reaction to this by fans was not frustration, but was actually gratitude. We want the animators to have as much time as they need to make the best adaptation possible. We recognize what an incredible work of art the Witch Hat story is, both in its themes and in its visuals, and we are glad the studio adapting it is taking the time they need to do it justice. Meanwhile, the rights to books get bought all the time, the ball gets rolling, then the project gets abandoned. It's why we hear about adaptations being in the works, then never hear about them again. This is across all of filmmaking though, it's not simply an adaptation problem, and how stories are made, meaning the process itself, needs some fine-tuning. Otherwise, production companies are going to continue seeing things as possible money-making machines first, and works of art second, and that's being generous. Oftentimes, they only see books as possible ways to make money and nothing else. And when that happens, of course they give up on the project easily. There's no passion there. There's no care. Maybe there is on an individual case-by-case basis, but at the top, where the big decisions are being made, there's not. Not enough, at least. Though anime gives me hope, I'm currently very pessimistic about the future of fantasy adaptations. If they can take a page from anime, perhaps some of these issues can at the very least be reduced, even if they aren't completely eradicated. Until then though, as more news of various adaptations are announced, I'll have to adopt the wait and see approach. Anime has built trust in its viewers, but streaming services and Hollywood have not. When they put the work in, creatively, practically, and passionately, then maybe I can be excited about fantasy adaptations again. Let me know your thoughts. Are there some fantasy adaptations in the works that actually give you hope, or are you feeling rather pessimistic as well? And then what are some other things that you think streaming services and Hollywood can learn from anime? Thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll chat with you later.